The Real Estate Insider, going inside the world of real estate to educate and demystify the home buying process. The first and last lesson before you start your home buying journey is do your homework.
Hello and welcome to the Real Estate Insider. My name is Denise Connor and I'm a buyer's agent here in the greater Nashville area and host of today's show. Buying a home may be one of the biggest investments you will make in your lifetime, and we would like to help make that process a little less stressful. In today's segment, the topic will be inspections, appraisals, and insurance, and the role they play in the home buying process. We hope that after viewing our program, you will have a better understanding of these procedures and how they take place, and that we answer some of your questions. With me today is Brent Scott, a home inspector, Scott Lamuno, an appraiser, and Anthony Trepka, an insurance agent. And just tell us a little bit more about inspections.
Sure, it's really important to get a home inspection when you are buying a property. You know, it's a big investment, a lot of money typically. It's also a big decision. And the inspection can offer you the education you need about the house, about maybe some issues that need to be taken care of. We address typically safety concerns. The inspector will inspect the roof pretty much to the foundation. We look at all the major mechanicals, the heating and air, the plumbing, the electrical systems. They'll inspect the structural components of the home and give ideas on the major appliances, life expectancies and an idea of the condition that they're in, and they'll also point out positive things. They'll tell you, some upgrades that have been made. Sometimes they can give you some ideas of some upgrades that can be made to make the house a little bit more efficient, possibly. And it's also important to interview the inspector before you hire an inspector. Ask them about the experience they have. Ask them about the different qualifications and different trainings that they've had, and then of course, price is often an issue as well. So.
And as a real estate agent too, I like to go on the home inspection, and I like to have the client go with me too.
Absolutely. I think it's a great idea to, if you're buying a home and you're having the home inspected, if you can be there, to be there. The home inspector can show you a lot of things that you might not know normally just walking around the house. And it also gives you an opportunity to ask them questions and let them explain things a little bit better to you than the report can do, because the home inspector will also provide a written report, typically emailed, and that's something else that I recommend folks ask is what type of report are they giving? Is it a checklist type, or is it a narrative? Are pictures involved? And what's the turnaround time? Real estate transactions, especially in the busy months, can be a little bit time sensitive, and you want to make sure your inspector can get the report back to you in a timely manner.
And I also, as the agent, I like to go over the inspection report with my clients too, just to make sure we go over everything, and if there's something that they're not happy with, then we can address the issue then.
Yeah, and if you're there, it helps you negotiate.
Okay, let's talk about appraisals now. We need to know, Scott, the difference between appraisals and inspections, because a lot of people don't know the difference between the two, and they wonder why they have to have one and the other.
Well, that's definitely a question that I get asked all the time. When I go out to the property, they'll ask, well, I've already had an inspection done, and they don't realize that what I'm doing is completely different than a home inspection. And whereas the home inspector will be looking for all the details of the house, and their client is the buyer, my client is the bank. So I'm looking for aspects of valuation for the house. So when I go to do an appraisal on a house, I'm not looking at all the details that the home inspector would be looking at. I'm looking at, I'm definitely taking into consideration all the mechanicals and the functionality of them. But I'm looking at, when I'm going on the interior, I'm looking at the finishings, I'm looking at the upgrades, I'm looking at all the different aspects of the house, I'm looking at the outside of the house, I'm measuring the entire house to get an accurate square footage. And, but my purpose is for valuation and not to see if the dishwasher works or to see if the hot water heater is working to its full capacity. So I'm not looking at all the small details. I'm looking at aspects of valuation for my client. So
Right.
that's definitely a big, a big difference between the two.
Well, he's kind of looking more at how the home functions, and you're looking more at the value.
That's right, and I'm looking at value, looking at market value. And when we talk about market value, that's a big question sometimes, because a lot of people don't know, where we get that number from. Like, do we just come up with that? Is it, how does that come about? And well, I mean, it's definitely a process where we go through.
That's where you get into comparables.
That's exactly right. When we have an accurate picture of the subject that we're looking at, we pull comparable properties that have sold recently, as well as other active listings, to compare to the subject property, to to see where these other houses that are very similar, what they're selling for. And we can get an accurate idea of what this house is worth by what other houses are selling for currently. So that's a very important aspect of the whole process, especially for my client, who is the bank, who is going to be lending the money on the property. So
And
yeah.
As an agent too, with the comparables, that is how I know what the difference in the values are in the homes that are in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And speaking of values and things like that, Anthony, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do with the home insurance?
Yeah, thanks, Denise. I appreciate you having me here today. And talking with these guys today, it's really helpful in the process of insuring a home, having an inspection done, because the inspection will assure me that the house is in good shape, because most insurance companies won't insure a house if it's not. And then also, when it comes to the value of how to insure a home, the appraisal is usually a really good indicator, not only the value of the home, but also the value of the land as well. And in homeowners insurance, the cost of land or the value of land doesn't need to be insured. So a homeowner's policy really concentrates on the house itself, the dwelling, and the contents inside. And there's some other coverages I'll talk a little bit about. But first and foremost, the reason why homeowners insurance is in place, especially if we're talking about a property that is financed through a bank, the mortgage company or the lender requires the buyer to have insurance in place, because they have an insurable interest in the property. Until the house is paid off, that homeowner is required to keep that insurance in place, because again, the bank wants to make sure that their investment is insured. So, but there's several different options when it comes to insurance, especially in Tennessee. There's full replacement value, which most reputable insurance companies will provide. That gives the ability to, if there is a catastrophe, which in Middle Tennessee there certainly is a lot of them, insurance when it comes to flood insurance and tornadoes, that full replacement value is going to assure that the house will be rebuilt of like quality. And there's also basically depreciated value, which people want to stay away from, because if the house is a certain age, a little bit older, or the roof is a certain age, there's some insurers out there that actually depreciate the value of the house and or the roof. So it's very important that the buyers out there look at strictly just a replacement value policy. But when it comes to the main part of a homeowner's insurance policy, it's covering the dwelling. That's the skeleton or the structure of the property. It's covering other structures, so if there's outbuildings like a shed or a barn or even a pool, fences, anything like that, that's covered under homeowners insurance as well. And then we've got this big house, but there's also stuff to put inside of it. So personal property contents coverage is a very important part of the insurance policy, because like you said before, this is a big investment, probably the biggest investment that people make in their lifetime, and the stuff that they acquire over that lifetime is sometimes just as valuable, if not more valuable, than the house itself. So a lot of people don't even think about this too, but if there is a catastrophe and a tornado and destroys a home, the family is maybe displaced from the house, and they have to live somewhere else while the house is getting rebuilt. So loss of use coverage is a coverage that on normal homeowners policies will basically cover the living expenses for the family to use while the house is getting rebuilt, since it was unlivable. And then there's also personal liability coverage, which basically protects people's assets if there's a lawsuit that involves any type of injury or death or property damage to basically a guest on the property. It basically protects the financial interest of the home buyer itself. And then all of this is wrapped into one type of policy. There's several other types of coverages that can be added, but all of it is subject to a deductible. That's the choice of the buyer. And basically what the deductible is the portion of the loss that the home buyer or the homeowner is responsible for. It's very typical to have like $1,000 or $2,500 deductible or anything in between there. And again, that's what the homeowner is responsible for in the event of a loss, whether how big or small. So
when it comes to value, now, do you base that on what the appraiser does?
That's a great question. The appraisal, if I'm fortunate enough to get that in my hands, it really is a good guide. But most well-trained insurance agents will be able to know the market, know the areas, know the cost to rebuild, and it usually breaks down the cost per square foot to rebuild, and that varies in different areas. But the appraisal is very, very helpful. But again, I use my own tools. Insurance agents will use their own tools to calculate what it costs to rebuild the exact house. Because if someone buys a house with 5 acres of property and for an X amount of sales price, that 5 acres is accounting for a big part of what that sales price is. So again, you can't really destroy a plot of dirt. So you're really just covering the dwelling itself. But yes, definitely the inspection and the appraisals come in really handy. For me, if I'm quoting somebody and basically producing a policy for somebody.
Now, say Brent finds some things wrong with something in the home. Would we take care of that first before you go and insure it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's some pretty strict guidelines with any insurance company out there that the house has to be in pretty good condition. There can't be shingles falling off the roof. There can't be gutters falling off the dwelling. So it's definitely a good idea for the buyer to get those fixed, because there might be additional problems associated with that condition. Right. There might be structural issues. So it's definitely a good idea to get those problems fixed beforehand as opposed to after. Most insurance companies won't even probably insure the property if there's in major disrepair.
Here's a good question for everybody on the panel. How about distressed homes? When somebody buys a distressed home, do you reevaluate everything differently in that case?
I really don't.
Go ahead.
I don't really do anything different, but I will say, there's a lot of folks looking at those homes to buy. If someone has had a hard time paying their mortgage, they also can have a hard time upkeeping the house and doing normal maintenance, which can lead to other issues. And I know that I tend to find more problems in a home that's distressed or a foreclosed home.
And do you appraise that differently?
Well, we're still looking at value of the property, and when we do an appraisal on a particular property, if it's distressed or whatnot, we are typically the lender wants the as-is value of what the property is. Now, if there are aspects of the house that makes it too distressed where it's not livable, then there are some things that have to be done to the house to make it livable, to make it where it's a livable house. So I would do a subject to appraisal, which is subject to the repairs to make it at least average condition where it's livable. So there are some differences with distressed properties. One thing we run into a lot is the utilities are off a lot of times when we are wanting to do the appraisal or even the home inspection. And those utilities need to be on, because for me, I'm not checking all the details of the property, but I am checking the functionality. I need to at least turn on the water and flush the toilet and turn on the heat to make sure that it at least functions. So for my purposes, it's it's checking to make sure that the mechanicals are functioning, but then I'm doing an as-is value. Hopefully, and if it's too distressed, then I'll have to do it subject to completion of whatever repairs are needed.
Because that's a big subject that we're all dealing with right now.
And I would definitely caution home buyers to really get stuff checked out. If it's a distressed home, I know sometimes that they're, a shell of a property might be really good and it's got potential, but when it comes to what all needs to be said and done to get a house purchased and insured and financed and inspected and appraised, is that most companies, when it comes to insurance, it has a lot to do with exposure to damage. And if there's, a house that has a really distressed roof, which is a big factor in Middle Tennessee, most insurance companies won't want to insure it. So that would kind of, maybe screw up the entire process in the meantime. Exactly. So it's not that we wouldn't insure it, but if they can, if there's a way for them to repair it and make sure that there is no exposure to the insurance company, because that's potentially thousands of dollars that the insurance company has to pay out. So I really caution home buyers to set their sights on a home that has existing damage, and if it's significant, it's it's something that they should definitely pay caution to.
And in that case, all of us just really need to stress caution when they need to do their homework.
Yeah, definitely, because you can go through the whole process. You can have your home inspector go out and do his thing. You can have the appraiser go out and do his thing, and you could be out hundreds of dollars, maybe thousands, and then to realize that maybe a house wouldn't be insurable, or wouldn't be able to get a loan on it even. So it's
and also with the inspection too, I'm always thankful when home buyers have inspections done, because if they try to save some money by not doing an inspection, once the keys are handed over, their house is theirs, and they're responsible for all the damage. And I mean, it's happened before that they a good paint job can seal up or just kind of disguise a leak or something, which is really, really important.
Absolutely. And I want to piggyback on something he said. Talking about homeownership and the buyer process. If you are buying a distressed property or foreclosed home, the utilities won't be on because nobody's living there. And I want to stress what he said, and a lot of times this is the responsibility of the person buying the property. It's not the responsibility of the realtor or the bank. Get the utilities turned on before the inspection, before the appraisal, because if I come to a home and the water is not turned on, we can't turn the water on, we can't turn the electricity on, we can't turn the gas on. Those utilities need to be on so that we can do our job effectively. I just wanted to stress that a little bit, because that happens a lot.
Oh yeah.
You show up and we have to do what we can, but there's a lot of things that have to be omitted that could potentially be very important.
Could be a lot of liability on us if we're if we turn on something and maybe it shouldn't have been, or maybe the house has been winterized for a few years and we turn the water on and all the pipes bust, then that could be a big problem. So
and even now we have to deal with flood zones. All the flood zones have been changed and everything. And as a real estate agent, I think we have to really do our homework, finding out as much as we possibly can about the history of the home.
Yeah, no, very oftentimes within the process of buying a house, the need for flood insurance usually comes up at the very end, which is there's definitely a process to put flood insurance in place. Most major insurers in Tennessee will offer it, but that's a very good point. When doing your homework and doing the research on the property on the front end as opposed to the back end will make the process a lot smoother.
Yeah.
And flood insurance.
I run flood certs on everything. I make sure that if it's in a flood zone, I know it ahead of time. It just makes everybody's job a lot easier.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to say too, just about with home inspections, is a lot of times for an appraisal inspection, they'll ask for an FHA appraisal, and that's where I'll go out and I'll be a little bit more detailed in my inspection, and still not to the level of a home inspector, not even close. So a lot of buyers will think, well, I've had a FHA appraisal, he's done basically an inspection, and they'll think that's enough, when that's the furthest from the it's furthest from the truth.
Right, and unfortunately they're not required to have a home inspection. They're requested to have one. There's a big difference between the two.
True, but it's definitely very important to not rely on any kind of appraisal for the condition of the property, but to have a detailed home inspection, that's important.
Speaking of floods, we're still all dealing with the 2010 flood situation. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're running into in that situation and how we could all rectify that?
Sure. There's several homes that we've looked at that may or may not have been in a flood zone even, that had excessive moisture buildup or moisture intrusion, standing water in the basements and the crawl spaces. You might be looking at a house that had no internal damage that was visible, but the crawl space flooded, which means you could have fungal growth in the crawl space. You could have structural damage. It's very common to find mud lines along the foundation walls, and find also mud lines on heating and air ducts. And when heating and air ducts become submerged, they need to be replaced. And the current homeowners it's possible they don't even know. They don't even know that the ducts, could have mold growing inside of them, that they could have been submerged. And
but mold is another inspector, right?
that's not really part of a home inspection, but we can find signs that could promote that kind of growth, and recommend further evaluations by other professionals.
Yeah, speaking of mold, would that affect your appraisal?
Well, definitely with flooded houses, that would definitely affect the value. And what we've seen is in some, and it depends neighborhood to neighborhood. Like some neighborhoods that did flood in 2010, you see a lot of the houses being completely renovated and fixed and everything done to the house. But at the same time, it still is a house that had been flooded. So a lot of times that would affect the value of the property too. And when I look at other comparable properties, the way I would do that is I would look at comparables that have sold that were flooded and renovated versus comparables that have sold that had not flooded, that maybe have also been renovated. The value difference there would be something that I could use to make an adjustment for any kind of value differences. So it definitely can affect the value of the house, but it also it may not. I mean, if it's an area that will never flood again, which I can't say that because you never know, but if it's in a 1,000-year flood zone, it's likely that it will not flood again. And a lot of people will see these houses that are completely renovated that are nicer than a lot of the houses that had not been renovated in the neighborhood. So in some cases like that, you'll see some of the values not being affected in a negative way. So it really depends on the area, but yeah, it does make a difference.
Anthony, how does that affect the insurance?
Yeah, well, just again, with what these guys do, the inspection, the appraisal, as we know, in 2010 it was a really major disaster. There were very many houses that were affected by the floods that weren't in a flood zone, that were not insured for flood insurance, because most people don't have flood insurance unless it's in a flood zone. So it was a pretty big disaster, but this again, what makes their job and their service so important is that these houses that might have been affected by the flood, if there's existing damage that was maybe covered up or disguised, if a person buys that home and doesn't realize that there's existing damage, it doesn't matter if there's mold, water damage, any type of structural damage, it's not going to be covered under their policy because it happened pre-existing to the time that they owned it. So again, it's just kind of testament to how important the process is to have an inspection and appraisal done. Most insurers, major insurers, will offer flood insurance. It's a kind of a myth that people think just because they need to be in a flood zone to have flood insurance. It's actually not the case at all. If you're not in a flood zone, you can purchase flood insurance if you want to, as a peace of mind. But it is a very important coverage to have, and those flood zones are always changing. So, doing your homework beforehand and looking up the house and seeing if it's in one of the designated flood areas, you could put that coverage in place, towards the beginning of the process as opposed to the very end. That way it gives the home buyer, because there's an additional cost to regular homeowners insurance, and it's a completely different or separate policy. So, again, starting and knowing that from scratch and from the beginning, so the buyer is really comfortable with the total cost associated with buying the home, is certainly better off.
Today's lesson can be found on page 12 of our Home Buyer's Guide, with step-by-step instructions created for you by the panel of the Real Estate Insider. For today's lesson, we will be going over an inspection report. Now, on the first page of an inspection report, it will be the cover letter. It'll have a picture of the property, it'll have the address of the property, inspection date, and who it was prepared by. The next page goes over some of the concerns that the inspector had with the home, like the exterior. Exterior continued. This will be with moisture problems, possibly foundation problems, cracks, different things like that the inspector has found. Next will be some concerns that were found with the HVAC system and the roof. Some concerns that he found with the attic. some interior things that he found wrong with the home. And the last part of this report will be what he found in the crawl space. Your next page goes over again in detail about the property address, client information, and inspection conditions. Next page goes along right like we were today on our inspection with the exterior components, building exterior, driveway and sidewalks, and deck. Next we go to the roof with roof coverings, ventilations on the roof, gutters, and methods of inspections that were used on the roof. Attic components, roof framing, insulation, ventilation, attic access. This is all covered on this page. Next page has to do with the crawl space, foundation, and structure. Conditions of crawl space, whether moisture was found, the flooring system, and this goes over floor joists, girders, support, wall studs, and floor. Next we go over their electrical system, at the service entrance, where it's located, the main disconnect, main servicing panel. Next we go over our plumbing, the water supply and drain piping. Water heater is involved in this too. The heating and cooling system, we go over in detail about the heating and cooling system. That'll tell you what kind of furnace, if it's a heat pump, if it's gas, testing the cooling, and it'll give all the details on the tests that have been run on your HVAC system. Next, they go over the windows, the doors, and interiors, the window frames, what type of interior doors, garage door openers, interior rooms. They'll go over the walls, the ceilings, and the floor coverings, kitchen appliances, and laundry appliances. And that is the end of our report for today, and that is the end of today's lesson.
We hope that you have enjoyed our informative program today and have a better understanding of the inspections, appraisals, and insurance. For more information, the panel of the Real Estate Insider have created a home buyer's guide with step-by-step instructions in a workbook format and is available on our website. Thanks to our panel of experts, Brent Scott, Scott Lamuno, and Anthony Trepka. Please tune in for our next episode called Meeting with a Lender. We will go on location to film an actual lending process. Thank you for viewing our program, and remember, before you buy a home, do your homework.